Hi, I'm Anaya. I'm the founder of TIKOs Way, and to start out our year of aviculture, I run on official, unofficial aviculturist Zeb. You might have seen him around on Facebook. He's got quite an impressive flock. He's also known for he's also known for showing off like tricks his birds can do, answering any questions, nutritional or otherwise, about them. And I'm happy to have him here today. I know you've got a flock of at least 35 birds, and I kind of wanted to know what started that. Like what's the story behind like your first bird? What made you want to get so many? What kind of brought you to where you are today?
Sure. Well, I've always been an animal person. I grew up in Montana, and my parents started me with horses at age 5. And I had a lot of experience with barnyard animals, goats, sheep, rabbits. My dad did a lot of rabbits. So I was exposed to the idea of being a hobbyist and having a lot of animals really at an early age. Although I was always drawn to the oddball creatures, my mother wasn't as encouraging of it. She used to tell me that when I moved out, I could have whatever I wanted. And I took that very literally. So my first year of college, I discovered aquariums since I had it started with a fish tank at Walmart, which quickly turned into 5 or more fish tanks. And then all of a sudden I was working at the pet store. My first day, the owner put a macaw on my shoulder and it bit down on the back of my neck. And I just stared at her and I could not understand why she would put this animal on me if she knew it was going to bite. And she said, "He likes you." And I did not understand how that could be. And she said, "You're going to be good with birds." And, I just, it seemed opposite to me. So she sent me home with a big pile of books. And I think I read them all within a week. At that time, I was a very broke college student. So I couldn't fathom being able to afford having a bird. But I was already into a lot of fish and a lot of reptiles. And then when you work in the pet industry, you find a lot of animals that need homes. So I don't know if I set out to have as many birds, but out of necessity, they tend to find me.
That's kind of how it works. You never like you go out to look for a bird, and all of a sudden you find a little guy, and it's like, well, he needs a friend, and this guy needs my help.
Yeah. I will say it was really hard getting into the large birds. So breaking that barrier from, people are willing to let you have a cockatiel or a lovebird when you're new. But if you're interested in something, which I would now call more of a medium sized bird, there's a ton of gatekeeping. And my experience was I couldn't adopt a bird, even though I was young and I had all the time in the world and I had experience. I had no kids. I was a dual income person at the time. Nobody wanted to give me a chance on a bigger bird until I took that chance. And once I had that experience, then the doors just opened wide up and people were, willing to let me do whatever I wanted.
That sounds right. I think it was something similar with us. We grew up with like smaller birds. The big like our first the bigger birds, it kind of just happened similarly. Mom went to a bird store and two blue and golds went up to her and they were like, "They like you. You should buy them."
Yeah. I feel like the birds chose me. I was never interested in them, but their reaction to me made me feel like there was something special there. And then over time, they took over my life.
They were like, "You don't see it yet, but you're gonna love me. And since you don't see it yet, I'm gonna have to make you take me home."
Yeah. Yeah.
I wanted to talk more about like your social media presence. You do a lot. You've got a full-time job, you've got a wife, you've got a kid, like outside of all of the other birds, which are kind of like multiple kids. I kind of wanted
Yeah.
to get into what made you want to start sharing that on like the internet. Like what about like the things that you do made you want to go out and be like, "Hey guys, I have birds and I'm gonna share what it's like with you guys."
Mm. I always wanted to do that, but there were things that held me back. And one of my biggest regrets is I didn't start earlier. You got to realize I'm old now, but I predate Google and probably the internet. um, YouTube wasn't a thing when I started, or actually, I think I started keeping birds just after Google became a company. So at that time, nobody was really putting themselves out there. You could be involved in the forums, and that was still somewhat of an anonymous thing. Unfortunately, I wasn't an early adopter of social media. I was actually quite late. And I would put myself out there at a later date and I would get some negativity and it would make me feel bad. And then I stopped doing it. I actually have a ton of content that I made years ago that was never posted. Ironically, it took a near death experience for me to decide that I no longer cared. I know that sounds dramatic, but I literally was in a very gnarly car wreck where my truck rolled over the I-4 multiple times, and I definitely thought that I was dying. And in those moments, I was so disappointed because I was so happy with where I was in life. My wife, my kids, and my birds. I had just adopted my very first golden conure, which is like a dream bird. It's a really big deal for me. And coming out of that, I realized that, if I'm on my deathbed and I'm thinking of my wife, my children, and the birds, I really need to stop worrying about everything else. So then it just became an exercise of putting myself out there consistently. Sometimes I read the comments, sometimes I don't. There's still a ton of negativity, but people have been so supportive that it's made it like a new hobby for me. It almost feels like social media is one hobby and the birds are another.
I think that's a great story. Just coming into yourself and realizing it doesn't really matter what I do. There's always going to be people who support me and people who don't. And if I keep letting the people who don't support me dictate my life, nothing's gonna get done.
Yeah, and everything I saw wasn't what I was seeking out. I heard from a lot of perspectives that I once believed and had changed my mind. But to be honest, I never saw anybody like me enough out there. And I had a feeling that there were people like me or people that would appreciate me. So, as strange as it seems, there really aren't a lot of men in aviculture in the United States. It's a big part of some cultures, but when I was younger, I felt like I never saw enough young people in aviculture. And I feel like I don't see enough fathers or aviculture or people that share all of my life experiences or interests. And I knew that couldn't be true. I just figured nobody had put themselves out there yet.
Decided to be the person you wanted to be able to see when you opened up the aviculture page. My next question is basically about your knowledge well. Of course, everybody's got questions, and I'm sure you did too. So when you have a question, who do you ask or where do you go to? And how do you go about sifting through information? Because not everything online about birds is true, but it's also hard to find
Yeah,
information that says otherwise.
that's true. One of the issues with the internet is it doesn't necessarily reward the best answer, it rewards the most common answer. And a lot of content is made through copywriters that actually don't know the subject matter. They're just repeating what has been said elsewhere. And you see a ton of that in the pet industry as well. Before the popularity of social media, you would have really bad advice that would circle through pet stores and forums. And it can be hard to break that cycle. I don't regard myself as an expert, but I like published because anybody can post anything on the internet. I really enjoy owning books, even if they're older. I know they may be outdated, but I have this idea that we're going to lose a ton of information with the older generation. I also have a few authors that I really like. I enjoy reading things from veterinarians. Tony Silva has. There's a couple books that I have that I not. The things that I don't like is when people hide behind titles. I actually do value experience over academia because everybody has read something, but the other option is you do it yourself. And though it may not be perfect, I think there's probably more untapped knowledge people who have experience but are not sharing because of the culture we have where people are sometimes beat up for sharing online if it goes against common beliefs. I think there's so much information out there that's just been hidden. Not necessarily they're trying to keep like a trade secret, but they're just not willing to argue with people on the internet.
Not willing to speak out in something that goes against what other people believe is the norm. Let's see.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like if you know something, you don't have to prove it to somebody. You can just go about your business and know it. And if somebody is going to continue to argue on the internet just to win a conversation about something that they think they know, what's that old saying? Never argue with a fool because people who are watching won't be able to tell the difference.
All right, I think that's a good way to look at it. You actually posted quite a few videos about these, but for people just looking to start out, do you have any advice for them, like in terms of like what type of bird, like how they can tell if they have the right lifestyle for a bird, anything like that?
So I usually start with stay off the internet. And it's for the same reasons. If you don't know what you don't know, you won't find it. And so I feel like if you get a book and you search through it, you may find a topic that never occurred to you. So I'm not saying you have to read it from front to back, but just getting a book and flipping through it to get some clues can be really helpful. The other thing is there's so many conflicting opinions online, and I guess the skin in the game is some people really want to be either a know-it-all or they want to be right because they're so passionate about something that you may not get a fair analytical look at certain subjects, if you know what I mean. So I always like to start with the printed material so you can at least you can understand the base. And then when you eventually go online, you can start reading into one side of the argument versus the other. But more than anything, I wish people would get involved in person. We need more mentors. I think if you connect with a person, maybe you've got a local rescue or a vet office that you can work with. Somebody showing you how to handle a bird and you being face to face with birds will do much more for you than searching the internet will.
I do like that perspective that like you can Google as much as you want, but if you don't have a base of information or you've never interacted with a bird, you'll never really know if there's one for you or if you have like a lifestyle for it.
Yeah, it can be really tricky too because so many of our opinions are dependent on our experience. And though your experience might be many years or decades, it could be that with just one or two individuals. So, for example, I like goffins. I've only met goffins that were pretty good pets, although they're loud, where other people have had very problematic goffins. So you got to think about the sample size. If you go out and you spend time with somebody and they have a cockatoo or a macaw that you bond with, maybe you might have been initially scared of that. But if you have a positive experience with it, that can just do so much more for you than feeling like you have to level up, right? Birds aren't Pokemon. You don't collect them all and you don't necessarily upgrade. You should probably work with what is drawn to you.
Another instance of like not forcing a bond, like letting the bird decide it wants to be your friend instead of just adopting it and realizing that it's not made for you, for your lifestyle.
That's a tough one because there's so much guilt people put out there. And I think it's really interesting why people do that. I think it all has to do a lot about what's going on inside of them. I'm of the mindset that we need more bird keepers because the solution to many birds need homes are creating more homes. And birds are so adaptable. I think it's great for people to try something out with a bird. I kind of reject this idea that a bird has to stay with you forever, no matter what. As long as the bird and the people are happy, I think that everything can be okay. I do hate to see birds get passed around often without understanding, but I think we need to give them more credit in terms of, if somebody wants to try out a bird for the first time and they stick with it for 2 or 3 years and they decide it's not for them, I would rather they feel comfortable with bringing that bird to somebody who can help rather than, dumping it off or not asking for help.
Just passing it off to like a neighbor or something, only for them to pass it off because they don't want it either. Kind
Yeah, I
of,
mean, how many birds have not received help because of the attitudes people put out there?
I can think of quite a few. Where it's like this never ending cycle of, I might want a bird. I don't want this bird. You can take this bird. I don't want this bird either. I'm gonna hand it off to somebody else. And then that bird finally comes to somebody experience.
Well, it's hard to say that. How can you say a bird has to stay with somebody forever and at the same time encourage fostering? Because to the bird, they're going to somebody's house, they're spending some time, and then they're moving on, right? And I can understand why people might want to try something. And I think we should encourage it. I think we should allow people to try because we'll never grow if we. Um, with that said, there are some situations that are kind of red flags that I'm less likely to encourage people. A lot of the large cockatoos, as much as I love them, they're probably too much for the average person. But when we're talking about testing out aviculture with lovebirds, cockatiels, parakeets, those are all lovely birds. But it's okay for somebody to try it, and if it doesn't work, to find them the next good home.
All right. That's something I can agree with. I like the idea of fostering a bird until you can find a home that's suitable for it. That's something we do here at TIKOs. We take in birds that we find don't have anywhere to go. We give them a home for a few weeks, and if somebody's interested, they move on to the next home.
Yeah. I used to take in a lot of birds when I worked in pet stores, and I would either improve their diet or get them in better feathering. Maybe I would train them, and then I would find them a home. And it was great for me because I got an opportunity to learn about all the different species, what my likes and dislikes were, without accumulating more than I could handle at the time.
And that's a good way to look at it. My final question for you is that by most people on Facebook, you can be seen as an expert. You don't see yourself as one, but other people do look up to you because like you are a good knowledge well. So I was wondering, what responsibilities do you think that some older aviculturists could take on that would help younger aviculturists feel like they could get into it?
I think mentoring, inclusivity, writing down your knowledge and openly sharing it, even if it goes against what people are preaching. Again, we go back to that thing where people have this idea of what things should be like, and they say it so many times on the internet that people believe that has to be the answer, when there's sometimes very well proven and deserving information from people who have actually done it that could prove otherwise. Um, this idea that birds live to 90 years old is one of my favorite examples. While there are some that do, many of them don't. And that shouldn't stop us from helping a bird in need. So, do I believe all birds need to go to somebody who's young? No, not necessarily. And it takes somebody with some life experience to explain that. So, if we could just remove some of the obstacles, the gatekeeping, I know those are all buzzwords, but we really need to invite more people into aviculture because we're losing it, and we're losing it quickly.
All right, I like that viewpoint that it doesn't take much for an older one to go, hey, here's something that I think. If you agree, I can tell you more about it. If you don't, that's all right. But know that this is there in case you ever want to look into it.
Yeah. And for everybody who's so worried about their bird outliving them, what a perfect opportunity to mentor somebody who may be willing to take over for you should the need arise.
For advertising in like fostering and mentoring that like, hey, just because he's my bird and I've had him for a while, it doesn't mean he can't move on to go find another happy home.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, we go back to that situation where I almost died, right? And I expect I should outlive many of my birds, but we're not promised tomorrow. And I'm thankful that a lot of the people that I know would make great homes for the birds that I have and love if my wife and children didn't want to carry that forward.
All right. Now, it's not like particularly common knowledge yet, but I am starting Wazoo for summer. And while there, I do intend to take in their pre-vet program. And I also intend to work with their Raptor Club, where they work with eagles and owls and stuff like that.
Cool.